An artist friend of mine, Pae White, came to me with a project that turned out to be one of the biggest casting and molding challenges of my entire career. It's super elaborate, it's got tons of parts, and I thought you guys would get a kick out of seeing it. Pae found these pieces in the archives of an art museum in Vienna, and I can't remember if they were chess pieces or if she just decided to use them as chess pieces, but in any case, she asked me, along with a bunch of other artists, to put our own spin, our own interpretation onto these pieces, remake them, and then she used them as part of a large installation in the museum. These are all wooden pieces, but Pae looked at the toy sculpting I was doing, and we decided to remake these as plastic toys. I decided to stay pretty close to the original designs, but make them into colored plastic pieces, sort of mimicking injection molding in plastic toys. So that meant CAD drawings, 3D printing, and lots of cast pieces in colored resin. The set consisted of all the various chess pieces, and each one was broken into separate parts. I couldn't model them all as a single piece because I wanted them to be multicolored, and each piece would have to be cast in a different color. So they all had to be separate parts, and they had to all fit together with a high degree of accuracy. As you can see, some of these pieces, like this rook, had an incredible number of pieces, and not just one. Some pieces required 4 of those, 4 of those, 4 of those. So you look at it and see that this project took hundreds of pieces. Some of the pieces were quite large, like those, and some of the pieces were really tiny. But all of them had to interlock and fit together. While I was doing the CAD work, I also had to do the renderings. So I exported the models via the OBJ format from Rhino into Modo and did the renderings in there. I just used a hard, shiny plastic material, and that worked out really well to give the final renderings. These were used to show the client, to visualize what they were going to look like when they were finished, and also to work out some of the colors in advance. Although, frankly, when I was mixing resin, I just mixed up nice colors. I didn't pay that much attention to what the original color plan was. I also made several color variations, so I had lots of flexibility when assembling the pieces later. While I was at it, just for fun, I rendered these things up as big, giant public art objects. They'll never get made, but it was a fun thing to do. This project happened years ago, and it was way before economical desktop printing came along, so we had to send the pieces to a service bureau. Problem with that was the industrial machines required to print these parts to this quality were hideously expensive back then, and there was no way we could afford to have them printed here in the US. So we sent the pieces for printing to China, and I have to say they did a really beautiful job. They fit together really nice, and that meant for me the biggest challenge was to get clean, warp-free, accurate resin castings from each part so that the cast resin pieces would fit together just as well. But I could not have been more pleased about the finish on these pieces and the accuracy of the printing. It was now time to make the molds, and as you can see, I made a lot of them. I did not want to use a custom mold box for each shape because it was just too many to make. So I went with a reusable system where you could make the molds into any size that you want. And I still have them left over. I still keep them because they do come in handy once in a while. And how they work is they're L-shaped. So you put them together like this. And like this. And in so doing, this group of mold sides can, you can move it around. You can make it any size you want. You can make it smaller. You can make it bigger. You can make it any size you want, basically, in any direction. So that is a very flexible, very mobile, very simple system for molds that change size as you need it. And they're just styrene. They hold together really well, and they work like a champ. The bases for the molds were just made out of 1/2-inch plywood, or MDF, and coated with my old friend beeswax. And I tried to gang as many parts as I could into each mold, But you have to be really careful when you gang parts in a mold. If all the parts are the same, you can orient them the same, and then you have a really clear prediction as to where your cutting lines are going to go. But if they're different parts, you have to orient them properly, number one, so they'll fill, but also so that when you cut the molds, you get a mold that reliably can be opened and closed. We poured most of these molds in the summertime, so it was pretty hot in the shop. So I couldn't mix up a big bucket of rubber and fill a lot of molds. I just would never get it poured in time before the rubber would gel. So I had to mix a lot of batches of rubber and pour a few molds at a time. After the molds were poured, cured, disassembled, and cut, it was time to pour resin. And just like pouring the rubber, I mixed resin in pretty small batches. In the beginning of the pouring process, I was pretty random with my color. I would just say, these 50 cavities randomly I'm going to fill with yellow. This group I'll fill with red. This group I'll fill with blue. This went on for quite a while, just mixing up small batches and filling molds with random color. But as I started to assemble the pieces, I had to become more selective. So when the parts started to come together and get completed, I was really careful about which colors were juxtaposed next to which. I wound up mixing very specific colors for very specific parts to make the final pieces look good. Once the parts were poured, it goes without saying, I had a lot of vents and sprues to cut off. Each part had its own particular design for vents and sprues, and all of them had to be cut, trimmed, sanded, polished, and put together. Channel regulars know that I am fanatic about getting clean parts out of a mold. Minimum parting lines, simple sprues and vent setups. And this is why. Look at these parts. Every single one of these parts, every single one of them has parting lines and a sprue and a vent to clean off. And look how many parts there are. Oh my God, this project was hundreds and hundreds of parts, and each and every one of them had to be cleaned off, sanded, smoothed, and polished. And that is why I am religious, I am fanatic about making clean castings. I hate cleaning parts. When it came time to glue the parts together, I used 5-minute epoxy and or super glue, cyanoacrylates. Some of the parts, like this piece, was simple and easy and glued together very, very easily and came together really nice. Other parts had very complex lines, like this part. This was much trickier to glue together because no matter how you assembled it, it wanted to slide and push the glue out. So it was really tricky to assemble parts like these. These kinds of parts I tended to do more with super glue, where I could just put the glue in on one side and let it bleed down. But you gotta admit, those are cool, the way they fit. Very, very hard to hand sculpt parts that look like that. To get them to fit like that, it's just about impossible. This is the kind of part you could really only do with 3D printing and or really skillful machining. But other parts didn't quite fit as well or as easily, so I did have slight gaps in the pieces. See, some were like excellent like that. Those are really nice fits. The pieces didn't come out of the mold with this level of polish at all. In fact, they came out looking more like this. You can see where I had to grind off sprues and vents. There's some parting lines here and there, some rough spots here and there. So most of the pieces look more like this when they were assembled, and we had to sand them and put them on a buffing wheel to get them to the final finish. This black piece makes it look really clear how they come out of the mold compared to what they look like after you buff them out. And by the way, this piece was pretty shiny when I made the first casting, but the resin eats the mold and takes away the shine in the mold. So even if you start out with a very high gloss piece, the mold will soon lose its shine and give you kind of a matte surface, and you've got to buff the plastic back to get it to shine. And then you got to go around and make sure you clean off all the buffing compound. So it is not a low labor process. There were a lot of pieces in this project, and gluing, finishing, assembling, and polishing took a long time. But I think everything worked out really well, and the pieces look really great. And I want to say special thanks to Pae White for including me in the exhibition. Now, I know that you guys think that I am the infallible Norse god of casting and that everything I do comes out perfect. Here's a few of my reject castings. All of these castings are rejects, failures. They either all have massive bubbles in them, or they're incomplete, or something horrible, something terrible went wrong with each and every one of these. So I am known for leaving a trail of wreckage in my wake. Hey, I hope you liked this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.